Hi Chris, how are you?
Good evening, Rod. I'm very well. Here we are on a mixed day, I'm going to say. Wet, windy and sunny. We've had 3 out of 4 seasons.
Weather forecasting on podcasts is rubbish, isn't it? Because it's not like we're giving an up-to-date forecast for people. It's just, I think it's such a British thing to do that we do it every week. It's amazing.
That sets the tone of the podcast. I was half going for Crowded House Song, 4 seasons in one day, but I missed it. Apologies.
I think you're showing your age a bit there.
Quite possibly. They got a new album out though, so maybe the youngsters will get it as new music.
Do they indeed? I went to see a gig last night. I went to see Ramesh Ranganathan, and it was interesting that they had a warm-up DJ, and the warm-up DJ was doing all the people from the 60s and the 70s as one category. They were the oldies in the house, and I was like, oh. And then he did the naughties, and oh. And then even my daughter wasn't the youngest then, because you had younger people than her, and I'm a bit like, oh, I am quite old now, aren't I?
What about the 80s children? More importantly,
yeah, he went back to the 80s because the DJ was from the 80s. He was playing old school hip hop to warm up for Ramesh, so that was pretty good.
And was Ramesh good?
He was extremely good, actually. He hit all the notes you'd want him to hit. He was engaging, enthusiastic, very, very funny. I'd say if you haven't seen him live, go out and see him again. He was terrific.
I generally quite like Ramesh. I think he comes across really well. Generally seems like an honest, genuine person.
Well, I bought a car the same day, and as I was buying the car, I said, I'm going to see Ramesh Ranganathan tonight. And the salesperson went, who? And I thought, how is it possible to live in the UK and not have seen him on TV or in a comedy show or something at this point? He's even got a hip-hop show on Radio 2.
He's surely done a bit of everything.
Absolutely everything.
Anyway, should we get on with the show? So it's episode 113, and it's the 22nd of March. And we're recording a little bit early, so it'll come out early next week. That's my fault because I'm going to be on holiday. I think it is worth disclaiming that in case there is some actual news that comes out on Monday or Tuesday next week.
It's not like we haven't got actual news to talk about today. The main show and most of the shows probably end up being about the Department of Justice case against Apple. The other shoe has dropped with that, but we'll get to that in good time. So we'll use the standard one. If Apple buys Nintendo in the meantime, which when you're in the middle of all sorts of antitrust and monopolistic behaviours is probably not going to be well regarded by regulators, is unlikely. That's why we missed that, and we'll get to it the week after.
I'm fairly confident Apple's not going to buy a Nintendo this week, but I could eat my words on Tuesday.
Or releasing the iPads, you should be safe from that as well.
Yeah, who knows what's going on there? I do wonder sometimes with some of the news that we're seeing, whether it's linked, whether they're trying to flush out the leakers, and that's why we're getting this weird messaging at the moment. Do you know what I mean? I wonder if they're sending some misinformation out to see how it comes out the other end of the pipe, if that makes sense. So that's what I've been thinking lately, because they're all over the show on the rumour mill at the moment.
Yeah, fair. Should we fire on and do some follow-up?
Yeah, let's do it. So straight into follow-up then. So what we got first?
We've got Cowboy's first all-road electric bike. So we talked about Cowboy before, which is why this is a follow-up in the context of they were kind of looking around Van Moof, which is my electric bike, at about that sort of time. They hadn't released an all-electric road bike, and this is the first one, and it looks really interesting. It's quite heavy. It's 27.9 kilograms, which is a little bit heavier than mine. It's got quite big fat tyres on it. It's got that sort of off-road look. It's available with like a step-through and a step-over frame, which is quite interesting. I know, the old standby of girls' bikes were step-through isn't necessarily the case. People with disabilities, they're easier to ride. You see them more in cities, but they're obviously giving that option. And it's actually got suspension, which is always good to see, front suspension at least, on a bike like this. And I notice it on city roads particularly, is how bumpy they are. So I think this is an interesting looking thing. It's not cheap. It's €3,500, but yeah, quite a nice looking product.
No, I think it looks cool, and it's nice. It's got its own design style. It's not a Van Moof style. I think Cowboy's an odd name for a company, if I'm honest, because here in the UK, Cowboy generally means somebody that's going to take you for a bit of a ride or not do a very good job. So I just find it an odd choice. But obviously in other countries, it may not mean that at all. So no, it's interesting, but I think it looks quite cool. I quite like the look of it. I think the photo's a bit odd in the Verge article because it looks like a very long bike, but I don't know if that's just the angle they've taken out.
Yeah, if you view there's an image gallery at the bottom, and you look at image 2 out of 7 in there from Cowboy, and it shows sort of the frame and obviously where the battery goes, and that, to my eyes, as a Van Moof rider, looks a little bit awkward as you've got that sort of big obvious e-bike battery holder at the back of it. But at the same time, it's got an integrated carrier at the back, and that's quite nice. Mine doesn't have that. I quite like as a city bike. You present those kinds of options, and it does look like a big boy. I've got to say, it looks like a big boy. But yeah, it's quite an interesting product, and I quite like to see things like this.
The one way it looks like they've literally photoshopped out the crossbar is interesting, because it literally looks like they've just cut it out. Quite a cool design.
It is quite a cool design, and you can see the extra strength thing if you flip between it and the photo before. Again, fascinating podcasting. But images 2 to 3, you can see what we're talking about for anybody following along at home. And there's obviously strengthening down near the pedals to give it that little bit more structural integrity. Interesting product. I think it's a good looking thing.
No, 100%. And like I say, it's got its own design style. It's not trying to be a Van Moof or anything. Like I say, it looks unique. I think it looks cool.
It does. Moving on, and I pulled this story out because it's a mix of your love of Formula One and my slight hesitation at people that use Excel to do all of their work. This is a new chief for the Williams team, I think, who's disgusted to find that they were using Excel to manage their 20,000 car parts. I'm a bit shocked by this as well. You think they'd be using something a bit more with it than Excel.
Yeah, I knew they had underinvestment. Let's call it that. And James Vowles, he came from Mercedes, so he's their new team principal. So he was probably used to having whatever he wanted and very all bespoke. And the fact they're running on Excel is, I don't know, shocking but not shocking, I guess I'm going to go with. I do think that, I don't know, half the world is running on Excel. That's kind of what I've got in my head, because whilst big companies all use systems, everybody tries to get it out into Excel to play with it, massage it, run it day to day, and then type it back into the system, so they're keeping everybody happy. But Excel does run the world.
For those of you who watch the YouTube, my face just crumpled in disappointment that this is the reality of the world. I do know that clinical trials and things like that, when you pass your data onto the regulator, so be that the FDA in America or be that our own MHRA, they expect an Excel spreadsheet, and I just think that's so wrong.
Excel is like the Acrobat PDF format, isn't it, for tabular data? Everybody uses it.
Why not? Let's just have the acronym CSV, and then it's just openable in everything. It doesn't have to be a Microsoft-specific product.
Yeah, but then you lose
Excel
all
sheets.
your formulas, you lose all your richness, your macros, your dodgy stuff.
Yeah, your dodgy stuff that you're copying from sheet 4 over there that somebody moved 3 years ago that you're now not accounting
and
for.
You're just selecting a couple of cells rather than the whole column. You know, all of those things.
It's just bad. And anyway, obviously he thought it was bad as well because he was appalled. So I'm not alone in this. So I share James Vowles' problems with Excel.
It must be quite interesting for him, though, going from the top of the grid, where you've got all the money, to the bottom of the grid, where you know there hasn't been investment for literal decades, and you know what good looks like, and you know what good now really doesn't look like. And so at least he can make a mark and bring it forwards.
I mean, I will bow to your knowledge of Formula One here, but didn't Williams used to win stuff? They were Renault and things once upon a time. I'm thinking Nigel Mansell's days.
Yeah, you're now showing your age. I completely agree with you. They used to win a lot, and they were a good, fantastic team. I'm a big supporter of them because they're local, but that was 20 odd years ago, and they've just not moved with the times. And they say the same, like with Man United. You know, the other football teams have caught up, overtaken them because they've invested in having gyms, swimming pools, you know, doing more on site, ready for all the athletes. Whereas Man U have just carried on with what they had 20 years ago. And it's that constant thing, isn't it? You've got to keep investing and keep pushing the ball forwards, because if you don't, somebody else will, and they will challenge you, and you'll lose it. And that's what happened with Williams.
And that is interesting. And we talked about this before in sort of context of the British motor industry, didn't we? That, you know, the engine was good enough. Why would I want to invent something newer than this? Because this one's good enough. And I guess, be it whatever sporting metaphor we want to throw at this, you know, motor racing or football, that's true in all walks of life. Is you need to keep up. You need to know what's coming over the horizon next, or at least be planning for it. You can't just rest on your laurels all the time, or you're going to get eaten.
Complacency is a killer.
It absolutely is. Moving on. Just a very... You write it in the show notes. Moving on, we've talked about Broadcom and VMware and the appalling handling of that, or maybe not their appalling handling of that. Maybe that's the only way to get profitability back into the company. A lobbying group known as the CISPE, CISP, I guess, the cloud infrastructure providers in Europe, is lobbying against this because they think it's going to bankrupt small providers, and it probably is. So I think this is quite a good thing that people are stepping into potentially licensing terms that have gone up by a factor of 12 up to 1,200% in some cases, which is just huge amounts of money, and people can't afford that if your business is based on it.
No, we are seeing it, and I was at the IT Directors Forum yesterday, and I think you and I discussed Citrix on the show a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, and there was a lot of feedback from a lot of companies of it's now untenable to maintain those sort of applications because the licensing has just got out of control.
Yep. And again, I would push anybody who's in this space to set a couple of your team looking at some of the open source things because they don't have the VDIs, the sort of the virtual desktops that you can push out with as standard with Citrix and VMware and things like that. But there are alternatives like Chasm that are open source that will let you do similar things, and maybe stop outsourcing a bit of this stuff and bring it back in-house, because things like this are going to bite you. We've said right from the beginning, it's the cost of getting out, and the cost of getting out is huge in this case.
Yeah, I completely agree with you here. Or just turn everything off and go cloud native. But again, that is equally going through the price hikes.
Or give people laptops and things like that again, and go cloud native with everything else. You don't need to virtualize everything.
Completely agree. Just for follow-up, if I sound different this week, I've got my voice coming through my headphones, and I'm just trying to get used to it because normally I don't hear my voice; I can just hear Rod. But we both of us listened to Upgrade. I listened to it after your recommendation, and they were talking around how they do listen to their own voice. And I'm not sure if I like it, but I'm going to persevere for this episode and see how I sound, whether it's improved it or not. But I should be able to pick up if I get too close to the microphone and to back away a little bit. And equally, if I'm too far away, I know to come a bit closer.
Well, you do sound better in my ears. I have not changed anything in my setup because I've changed another major part of my setup, and I didn't want to fiddle with more things tonight because we're in a bit of pressure to get the podcast out before Chris gets to go away on holiday. So I probably sound the same, hopefully not worse, but I'll talk about why my setup has changed probably next week.
Yeah, that could be some good content.
I think so. Should we do some news?
Let's get into it.
And speaking of setup changes, there were quite a few people in the Intel days that were delighted to discover that they could now run macOS on commodity hardware, on Intel and AMD hardware. And this is maybe not a surprise. These machines were called Hackintoshes. They'd put the Mac onto a bit of hardware. You'd have your Hackintosh. I built a couple of them back in the day as well, it must be said, on things like ePC laptops and the little Dell laptops that were good for it as well, when Ultrabooks, is that what they were called? The very thin ones, the sort of cheap ones that came along for a little bit, came about. You could really quite easily install macOS on them. Netbooks, that's what they were called. And as we move to Apple Silicon, it's getting harder and harder as Apple don't make drivers for Intel chips or AMD. Not that they made them for AMD chips anyway, but people could make them work. It's not going to be a thing for very much longer, I don't think.
I'm not surprised by this, but equally I think Apple's silicon is so good, and with the introduction of more and more lines, the original M1 chips are now getting a lot cheaper, so there's some good hardware you can pick up, hopefully a good price point. It's a shame, and I thought Hackintosh was a great name, but I'm not surprised this is going to happen.
Yeah, and it was always a bit of a struggle that you were forcing hardware that was never designed, macOS was never designed to work on, so you had to install kexts and hacks and all sorts of bits and pieces to get them to run at any sort of acceptable thing. Parts of them wouldn't run, like it wasn't always easy to get iMessage to run because of the cryptographic side of it, as we talked about with the beeper story. So it was always a bit tricky. And I'm kind of with you. You've got M1 Max now down at a price point in America. You can pick up one from Walmart for $649.99, for an M1 MacBook Air, which is an awful lot of computer for the money. And I understand you've got old hardware lying around, or you want to do it because it's interesting and you want to challenge yourself. But at the same time, just buy a Mac at this point. Although the only hesitation both of us would have about this is giving Apple money right now might not be the nicest thing to do.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that statement. I do wonder whether the M1's going to have an unnaturally long life of support, if that makes sense for macOS, because it's come out. We had a few years of new devices coming out, so I wonder actually whether an M1 was a good buy and B will continue to be so for a little bit longer, because I think it will be supported far longer than some of the Intel machines were.
I think it will. It's been such a good machine, and so many people have bought them, and we've seen it, when we did the Apple report card and we've done the Apple quarterlies. It continues to run along that line because people aren't feeling the compelling urge to go and buy another one. So when you've got such a good computer, why would you?
I completely agree. I do wonder though, maybe one year when they're struggling, that's the year when it gets to chop. But anyway, should we move on?
Moving on, not that they're anti-monopolistic. Moving on. This was just something we talked about in passing a couple of shows ago. Elon, bless him, has a number of companies. He does rocketry, he does cars, he does satellites, he does bits and pieces as well. This is one of his lesser known ones. This is called Neuralink, which is he wants to embed chips in people's heads so they can control things. There was a report they put one in their first human patient, despite all the potential violations from the FDA about putting them in chimps and the quality that they were being kept in as part of animal testing. Anyway, they've put one in a human. The human who's disabled says his life has changed. He can now operate a mouse cursor and has been having long Civ 6 sessions. So I don't really know how I feel about this.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. I think part of me, when you first started talking, I'm like, none of this sounds good. But then when you hear that somebody that couldn't do these things can now do these things, then I think, well, he's got a quality of life. However, I guess we just don't know what the long-term impact is. I don't think I'm qualified enough to talk about this.
Yeah, I don't know what Elon's goal here is. We're going to go post-human so you control computers in your mind, but we've featured a few stories on this show about, and then they get bored and they don't support the firmware, and then the chip in your head stops being able to control all these things it's enabled you to do. It's not like it's easy to pull it back out if you get an infection or something in it either as well. There's a lot to go wrong here.
Yeah, like I said, I'm very mixed on all of this. Maybe Elon's developing it so that he will live forever.
Probably. You can transfer his consciousness into a Tesla and, he can drive around.
Be like Lord Voldemort out of Harry Potter.
There's an episode of Futurama where you get ghost cars that get haunted by dead robots, I'm sure. But Bender becomes one, I'm pretty sure.
Oh, really? I haven't seen it.
Yeah, I think that was a thing. Moving swiftly along before we get completely derailed by thinking about that, there's a story in the Register this week about India's competition regulator ordering Google to an investigation into Google Play. I think they fined them before 15 to 30% of their income in India, and they haven't paid the fine yet. So this is Google being highlighted that they're abusing their monopoly too. I would have thought Android is vastly prevalent in India, even though they now make iPhones there. I think the market there is entirely dominated by Android devices, so this is probably quite a big deal for them.
Yeah, I mean, iPhones going there is fairly recent. This can be massive, isn't it? It's not like Google haven't got they haven't got all the money because Apple's got all the money, but Google's next. I'm surely they've got to be up there.
They do. And it sets everything in context. A lot of our attention on this show is looking at the legal cases against Apple, and we tend to mention Microsoft and Google in passing, but they're facing them too. And it's not to lose sight of Google are monopolistic in their area as well. You can install alternative apps and things, and they allow side loading normally. But this is a bit different, really, isn't it? So interesting that even in markets like India, that you're seeing these kinds of things happen. So an interesting story, and again, one worth keeping an eye on. In light of South Korea doing it, India is doing it. As we're going to talk about in a minute, the Department of Justice are doing it in America, and clearly the EU was as well in Apple's case. All these things are coming for Google too. Yeah,
it's going to be an odd time, I think, the next, insert period here, whilst all this anti-competitiveness goes on and EU regulation, UK regulation, US regulation, global regulation, surely at some point. It's a very odd period. I'm amazing that people like Tim Cook didn't step down about 8, 9, 10 months ago, and then they could have had an amazing tenure where they just made everything great happen and then let somebody else do the mop up afterwards.
Yeah, you're leaving a pretty horrible problem for someone there. Do you want to tell us about new iPad Pros and matte screens?
Yeah, I thought this was quite interesting. So potentially an option for the new iPad Pros, maybe a matte screen. And it got me thinking, would I go for a matte screen? And I don't know the answer. So matte screens historically have been available on the Pro Display XDR, so the big £5,000-6,000 displays, 32 inches. And you could spend, I think, like another $1,000 and get it with a matte texture. They then did it on some of the high-end Intel iMacs. You could have a matte display, the 27-inch one. And then you can also get the studio display with it. So it's generally been on really big screens. Interesting, they might bring it to the iPad. And what it does is it's like a nano texture they've created so that if you're in a super bright, glary environment, you can get this nano texture screen and it looks great in sunlight basically, or if it's coming through the window. Less reflections. I've tried one out in an Apple store. Often you don't see them in Apple stores, but they had a studio display in there. And I wasn't sure about it. To me, it just made everything not look great. I'm going to say it was a little bit mottled, a little bit dull, just not as pin sharp as a standard screen. So I'm mixed on whether I like it. But then I look over at my iPad and realise how dirty the screen is. And I was on the train yesterday. And would it be nice on the train? I don't know. I think it's something you need to see, whether it's for you or not. But interesting, they might bring it to the iPad first. I'd have expected this to filter through the MacBook Pro lineup first, and then maybe come to the iPad. I find that a little bit odd. But then if they're moving to OLED on the iPad before they go anywhere else, then maybe they're going to do matte at the same time. But it just seems an interesting place to introduce it into the portable market for me.
It is different, isn't it? And I think if you're a designer or your screen is in direct sunlight a lot of the time, then a matte display makes sense. If your office is such that you can't pull the blinds behind you and you're getting a lot of reflections, and it makes sense to have them in that kind of environment if you don't like it. But I got to think on a device where you're poking it with your fingers quite as much as you are an iPad, I don't see how a matte display is going to be particularly useful there. I know Marco Arment has some sort of, is it paper-like or something like that, sort of thing he puts over the top of it. But then he's got slightly odd taste in these kinds of things anyway. I think for the average user, what they want is a nice bright screen that they can see in most conditions, and I don't think matte's going to help with that particularly.
Yeah, I'm completely not sure about it, but it did raise the question, if I am going to go for something like one of these devices, would I go for that? And I don't know the answer. I think it's something that I would want to see. I think it's good they're bringing it to more of the lineup. And like I said, I'm surprised it didn't go laptops, then maybe iPads. Will we get this on the iPhone at some point? Could be another SKU for us, another upsell.
Yeah, maybe in the Ultra. Moving on, and a very short story. It's just an opinion piece or a think piece by, I think it's Dan Morin, in Six Colours blog, who works with Jason Snell, about it's time to bring the airport back. And it gives me a bit of nostalgia, really. My first wireless hotspot was an airport, the original one that looked like a UFO, stuck to the side of a wall. And it's the first time wireless was a thing. And again, I think we've talked about it on the podcast. They were quite easy to set up initially. As Wi-Fi became more complicated, if you tried to do anything a little more difficult with them, it became very hard. Apple obviously tried to make it a little bit more compelling to people while building a time machine into later versions of it as well, so you could do your backups on it too, but they were very expensive, and other providers were appearing that could do it better. I think if Apple had bought somebody like Eero back in the day, then there'd be a leg to stand on here, but I think the world has moved on. Apple can't keep up with Wi-Fi 7 and a car, not that they could keep up with that, and the devices, and the monopolistic practices, and iPads, and building their services revenue, and. I think airport would be a distraction to bring back at this point. What do you think about it?
Yeah, mixed. So part of me go, I love my airports. I thought they were fantastic, and they were ahead of the curve a little bit with it. Everybody's caught up. Mesh networking's here. If they were going to buy anybody, 100% they should have bought Eero. I've got the Eero devices. Fantastic. Swapped my ISP out. The Eero just dealt with it. It's so easy to use. And I wonder whether the Eero would have existed as it is today if Airport hadn't have been a thing, because the Eero is very like how Apple did Airport. It's all app based. You're not going to your web browser to set it up. They've made it very easy for most people to do it without being very technical. I don't think Apple should get back into this space, because Apple have demonstrated time and time again that they struggle to keep all the wheels spinning at the same time. Let's go to Apple Music Classical. We haven't got that on all our devices. We haven't got it in the car. We had it in the car for a day. They took it away because it had bugs. They just don't seem like they're letting all the projects run on their own. And I think it would be a distraction, which is a shame, because the airport piece was great. But Eero have taken that spot, and there's many others that are probably equally as good, but maybe not as easy to set up, but probably more configurable, more techy. So I don't think they should get back into the space now. Maybe my answer would have been different a few years ago. They've just brought a Vision Pro. This would be a very small distraction. They need to fix the lines they've got, get the iPads out. Let's get some good HomePods, carry on doing stuff with the Apple TV. You know, they're their hobby lines, and they're not getting enough love. So no more hobbies.
Yeah, I don't think people care about this stuff. I think the average user, who, I mean, you're a bit more motivated than most, goes out and buys an ear or buys some sort of mesh thing because their home internet is awful and they've been forced to look into it. But if you're your average user and you get some BT Home Hub thing and you get some, these days comes with mesh discs as well, you plonk a couple of them around the house and off you go. You don't care if its latency's not quite as good. You don't care that it's maybe not reaching one particular part of your garden, maybe a little bit more since lockdown. But I don't think most people really give two hoots about rushing out and buying a more expensive router, and that's what Apple was always facing here. The displays, to me, which is a business that they left and came back to, is slightly different because there was no quality alternative, really. There was LG offered a monitor, and that was it.
I've got one here. I'm talking to you on
You've got, exactly. And that was the ultra fine, as everybody says, and I think it's a better monitor than that. That's not fair. But I think Wi-Fi is long past them. People don't care. It's not a market Apple's going to make money in.
No, and I don't think it's big enough because a lot of the ISPs, as you already said, they're already selling you a mesh network or a couple of repeaters or whatever it may be. So most people aren't then going to go, I don't want own brand, mesh routers. I want this specific one. So no, I think if you care enough, go and get the Eros or a more techie solution. Like you've got the Ubiquiti stuff.
Ubiquiti Unify line, which I absolutely love. I think it's terrific. And I do log in with a web browser. But they've got apps as well, and I can do all manner of clever things with my apps that Apple would never think about. For example, if I run the Wi-Fi Man app on my phone, I can bang it off walls as I walk around the house, and it'll map my house for me. Exactly on walls, give me a floor plan, and give me a Wi-Fi signal in that part of the room and that part of the house. It knows the difference between floors and things like that. It's just such a cool product.
Yeah, no, that is cool. And I think that's what you've got there. You've got Ubiquiti for your more techie audience. You've got Eero, I think, for the general population. And then 90% of people will just go with whatever the ISP give them.
Yeah, exactly. So, nice pipe dream, but no thank you. Moving on, we've got a bunch of DMA-related stories that we've bundled together to try and get through them because there is no getting away from the DMA. And there's been quite a lot of news about it in the last week in the sense of clearly Apple are stepping back a little bit on some of the claims they've made. We saw the web-based distribution of apps. They're clearly still in discussion about core technology fee and things like this. Nothing that's happened so far this week with Department of Justice makes me think any of this stuff is going away anytime soon. In fact, it's probably going to get worse for Apple and Google. And this is just a story that Epic, who are one of the companies who are suing Apple, more on them in a minute, their app marketplace is going to take a 12% cut against Apple's 20 to 30% cut. So that's probably quite compelling for some games-based developers.
Yeah, it's good Epic are coming out with a bit more detail. 12%, yeah, it's hard to know what the right number is. I thought they'd have come in at 10 just to prove a point, say, we're a third. But 12, they've obviously done the numbers. 12 is obviously the number.
Well, what it is competition, because is 30% too much? Is 30% too little? We've got no idea because it's what Apple have charged. So no matter what the number is, it's competition. And if at 12%, and they'll let in apps that Apple would say no to with a trustworthy brand, which Epic is, lots of people like Fortnite and Unreal. Why not start at 12%? Maybe it'll go up, maybe it'll come down. But what it will do is push a bit of competition Apple's way.
Yeah, and that's what we need. And we need some marketplaces there to test what this is like, because at the moment we haven't seen anything yet, and obviously you and I aren't going to see anything because we're in the wrong place.
And neither will Americans because they're in the wrong place. And presumably, as we talked about a couple of weeks back, if you leave the EU, then your Fortnite on your Epic Store will stop working after a month because you won't get updates from it as well. So there's still lots of problems around this. I'm not surprised Apple are still talking, but it's good that we're now seeing people like Riley Testalt with the App Store, the Alt Store, and Epic come out and actually talk about their plans in a little more detail. And even given Apple's slightly odd position on moving things around a little bit, they think there's money to be made in these marketplaces.
Yep, I do. Let's talk about the DOJ at the end. Sorry.
Yeah, it'd be easy to jump into that. Related to this isn't just a store that's coming to the iOS, it's coming to Google as well. So we've linked to a story from 9to5 Google too, talking about the Epic Store there. And that's, again, we know Google are being monopolistic in their particular neck of the world as well. I mean, let's face it, between two companies, you've got everything sewn up. I read a thing that the two primary smartphone brands in America are Apple and Samsung. We might talk about that more in a minute as well, who own 90% of the US market between them. That's that's still Google at the end of the day. It's got it, despite Samsung's efforts to have their own app store. So Google need to be taken to task about this stuff as well, as we just talked about in India.
Yeah, completely agree.
Yep.
It should be one. I think it should just be for all OSs. I think they need to get away from the market size piece and just go, right, all operating systems. It doesn't matter whether you're iOS or iPad, Mac, Windows. These are the rules you've got to adhere to. And
Absolutely.
I think doing it on the monopoly side, I don't know. I'm not sure that's the right way of doing it longer term. I think it's a good starting place, but it should filter down.
Well, it should be a negotiation. And again, we've got to keep pushing the DOJ stuff down the road a little bit, and hopefully some of the points that are kicking around in my head I'll remember to talk about. But the next story is from Michael Tsai, who's very good at bringing together he's a link aggregator, lots of things that are going on at this point. And this is just following up on what we talked about a minute ago, Apple's workshop with a couple of developers about their DMA compliance. I quite like some of the stuff within this. The EC have told Apple they can't notarize alt apps. Now, that's one of Apple's standout things, is everything has to go through Apple to be notarized. So that's a big change that Apple's also going to have to move around on in some point. And the sort of fundamental underlying argument in this is, how can Apple be this sort of gatekeeper when we've had Macs since 1994 and Apple computers for longer? And not all apps have to be notarized. We trust things to be installed on a Mac, and we're trusted as users to do so. So their argument that security is the be-all and end-all of this, and you have to notarize apps, is frankly nonsense. So, yeah, Apple's argument is slightly fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Well, your phone's with you, it's got your wallet on you, yada, yada, yada. But we also know our computers are full of these things too. So it's a slight straw man argument to me.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that.
But it's interesting, there's lots of links in there, including one from Gruber about how terrible the DMA is, but we know what Gruber thinks about this stuff at this point.
Well, no way it exists outside USA.
His take on the DOJ stuff is interesting too. So it's worth a look. There's some good, useful links in there. Staying with the DMA, we have 3 companies now weighing into accusing Apple of playing games with the App Store rules. So this is Epic and Microsoft, and I've forgotten what the third one is. I think it's like a joint initiative between a couple of other companies within the space. But as we've just talked about, people aren't happy. Match Group is the name of the third organization.
I've not heard of Match Group.
I think Match Group is like a bunch of smaller developers who've come together to say the App Store rules aren't fair, and it's a violation of all the anti-steering, all the things that we've talked about up to this point. So it's not just the EU that's unhappy about it. Every other company in the space is unhappy about Apple's stance with it, and that's been obvious with things like Microsoft not bringing their Xbox streaming app to the App Store, and all the other bits and pieces we've heard over the years. Meta feels it's unfair because of the app tracking stuff Apple brought in, or whatever it would be. Developers aren't happy, and that's what keeps coming back from all of these things to me, is developers aren't happy, and they've actually got a voice now. The EU has given them a voice to do this.
Do you think this is going to be Apple's fall from grace this year? Because they've had a cracking 20-year run, maybe slightly over, where they've just gone from strength to strength. There's obviously been some missteps during the last 20 years, but they've made a lot of right steps.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm in danger of saying things I want to say during the Department of Justice bit, but in one level, you can understand their position. They nearly went under. They ran out of cash. They did the clone program. They didn't have any decent products that people wanted to buy, and it took their original leader to come back, draw lines through all the product lines, and say, no, we go back to basics and we start again. And all they've done since then is make money and make good deals and all that kind of stuff. So the not invented here thing, and we're the plucky underdog in all this, and we deserve to do it, but they're not anymore. They're the 30-pound gorilla in the room. They are what IBM were when Apple started, and they don't realize that.
Yeah, I do wonder whether it's time they need some different management, because they've had the same management for a long time, and it'd be very hard to do. But do they actually need some fresh thinking, because they're just carrying on doing what they're doing in a world where they need to read the room, and should have read the room a couple of years ago?
Yeah, almost certainly. Anyway, moving on. One last story, and this is it's not a surprising one, but it's not a great one. From Ars Technica, talking about how car makers are actually sharing the data they get from your connected car with people like insurance agencies. So if you're driving badly, they're quite happy to share some of that information with your insurer. Your premiums go up. And I certainly didn't agree to that when I bought a car. You probably didn't either, and you got to think, how much do... In the UK, we have different rules, but they're not that different in some ways, and I don't like stuff like this.
So what's happened here then is a car could be telling insurance companies how you drive. That you're in a 60 mile an hour zone and you're doing 80 miles an hour, let's say. So you're a third over the speed limit, or you're aggressively braking, or you nearly had a crash but didn't, or you maybe did have a crash. And I don't know. That's like having a black box without having a black box. That black box for people that are unaware, or what young drivers can have in the UK. I don't know if it's mandatory, and it can report your driving and help you have, more competitive insurance, is my understanding. When you're a younger driver, because the premiums are so high, but this can help take the edge off the premiums. Hopefully I've explained that okay, Rod. You've got younger children than me, well, older children than mine, but you're fairly young, so they've recently learned to drive.
Yeah, so I've done that this week, in fact. New car, I had to get new insurance for it. We didn't have a telematics box in the Mini. I'll talk some numbers here. So there are 4 drivers on the car. 2 of us are pretty much over the age of 49. I think that's the correct way to say that. One of them is almost 21 and one of them is just 18. One has only passed her test in the last 4 months. One has passed her test 2 years. No telemetry. In the first car, the insurance premium was £1,900 a year.
Wow.
Without a telematics box. The new car, slightly more expensive car, not an awful lot in it though, slightly less powerful, but the insurance was £1,700 a year. Ticking the telematics option would only have taken it down by £100.
Is that all?
That's all.
Wow.
So in that box is then monitoring all 4 drivers of the vehicle, not just the 2 people that you're trying to get your insurance down with. My insurance for any car has not been that in many, many years. I'm an old man, so that's a bit of a shocker. But you take things like that and you read this article, and it's not necessarily just that if the car has more sophisticated sensors, it's the cameras watch what you were doing, or you violated a 30 mile an hour limit. It's you accelerate very hard, you brake very hard, you turn very hard. You don't turn the indicators on ever. Things that the car knows about with actually using external sensors, and it's picking all that up, and it rates you from 0 to 100 for how safe a driver it thinks you are. And in the terms of service, OnStar in this case, is the revelation that GM will share user information with third parties, including usage-based insurance providers. So your score for your car goes to your insurer, who charges you higher premiums as a result, and that's disgusting.
Wow. Yeah. Not liking that one, but sounds like something GM would do.
Yeah, so maybe don't pay for the monthly. Keep your internet going to your car. Maybe that's the way forward.
Yeah, quite. Should we move on to media?
Let's move on to media. We've got one item, and it's over to you to talk about Ferrari.
So I've done my homework. I've been and watched Ferrari, Michael Mann film. I'm a big Michael Mann director fan. And it's cars and Michael Mann. So I've been looking forward to watching this for a long time. I ended up watching on a train, so in 2 segments, but it fitted perfectly into my 2.5 hour train journey that was obviously cut in half by a day of work. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really good. I thought they could have done one of the crashes with a bit less gruesomeness about it, but I understand why, because there was a point there. But I generally really enjoyed it. I thought it was a good film, and it lived up to what I'd expected from Michael Mann, Adam Driver. Interesting, Adam Driver was in it because he did The House of Gucci as well, where he played another Italian mogul, I guess. I thought it was good. I generally enjoyed it on the whole. I learned a bit about Ferrari because, I'll be honest, we all are aware of Ferrari cars, but we're not really... I was unaware of how they got from A to B. I knew they liked racing a lot, but I'm unsure, I guess, a bit of their history of how they got from being into racing to being a mass sports car producer, not mass, a niche supercar producer, I guess is the right word now. But I thought it was a good film on the whole, and it lived up to being 2 hours, which is the right length for a good film.
Yeah, I'm with you. I gave my review, and it was similar. I quite enjoyed the film. It's not a 10 out of 10 film, but it's enjoyable. Most of it was very well handled. The costumes look fantastic. Everybody looks super stylish and Italian from the 60s and that. I was a big fan of that. Adam Driver's great. Everybody's very, very good in it. Soundtrack was good. Efficient directing. I don't think it's the best film Michael Mann's ever made.
Agreed.
We're all going to say Heat if that's the case. But no, good film. An enjoyable way to spend just over 2 hours, just under 2 hours, whatever it was. Far better than Killers of the Flower Man.
I completely agree. It was a good 2 hour film. I agree with you on this. It's not a 10 out of 10. It's not the best film I've ever seen, Equally, definitely not the worst film I've ever seen, but I thought it was some strong performances. Um, liked some of the style. Loved seeing some of the old, beautiful vehicles that they had, whether it was some of the vans they had, and just the general style of it. I thought was really good, and just very very enjoyable. Nice way to spend 2 hours. Glad it wasn't a TV series. Glad it wasn't a 3.5 hour epic. So I enjoyed it. It was nice to have something new because we're not getting a lot of new films. You're not going to the cinema every month craving the next new blockbuster because they're just not there. So for me, it was perfect. Just what I wanted.
Yeah, I'd go with most of that. I thought they got the period very good, and you've never wanted to live in sort of late 50s, early 60s Italy as much as that because it just looks terrific. Yeah, I'd agree with you. And it was nice to get that sort of real sort of family feeling to all the workers at the plants and, how seriously took that. And they went to mass together as a company and all that kind of stuff. I did like the details.
Yeah, and very different world. Pre-mobile phones, pre-IT, just completely different world. It was quite nice to watch. Yeah, I enjoyed it. Nice period piece.
Yep, I'd agree. Should we do some gaming?
You may do some gaming because I don't think I've played anything, I must confess.
Okay, that's fine. One is a link to, if you do want to do some gaming on your phone and not your iPad, Backbone will now send you an iPhone Lightning controller. No good to me. I've got USB-C on my phone. It sort of gives you it snaps into this controller in the phone, so it makes it a bit like a Nintendo Switch. If you're into gaming a lot, why wouldn't you get something like this? I guess it saves you having to carry an Xbox or a PlayStation controller around with you, and not a ridiculous device.
I think these look quite cool. I've seen a couple of these in a shop actually. I think they look really good. I'm not surprised that they're doing this. I think this is great. I wonder whether we should have had something like this earlier, but yeah, I think it looks good. And if you're really into gaming, why wouldn't you get something like this? It's a cheap way. I could have taken this on the train and played some games on my phone instead of taking a Switch and a phone, for example. So I would be in support of this.
And in a perfect link, Call of Duty Warzone Mobile dropped yesterday. This is a proper version of Warzone, not the sort of half-baked one that was built into COD Mobile that we talked about in this podcast before. This takes us back to the classic map from the lockdown days that I've talked about in this podcast before, called Verdansk. I've had a very quick go of it tonight because I really haven't had time. I played one game. I got shot in the head extremely quickly. So people have obviously got the hang of this much quicker than they did the other thing, but it's nice to go back to that map. It's quite a faithful recreation of the map. It doesn't have the glass that you can shatter and all the rest of it because it's not quite as powerful as a PS4 or PS5. But really quite impressive what they've managed to do with the engine. And the really interesting thing about this is the progression you have in the main game. So if you do play it on your Xbox or your PlayStation and you've unlocked guns and operators and all this stuff, the fundamentals of the engine are transferable back into the mobile version and the other way. If you unlock a skin in the mobile version, it will now become available in the full fat version of the game. And that's interesting technology. They're apparently going to keep them in lockstep. That if you do release a map for the pro version of the game, the PlayStation or Xbox grown-up version, it's fairly easy to take those assets and shrink them and put them onto the mobile platforms. And that's quite a feat of technology.
It's quite a bit of investment, isn't it? Because you don't know how big the mobile piece is going to be, but I guess if they want people to come to it, they've got to put some investment in. So, yeah, like you say, it's impressive how they've done that. Maybe that's why it's taken a while for it to come.
Yeah, I think so. And last thing just to mention is I talked about it on the last show, Balatro, which is the sort of sleeper hit that The Guardian talked about and others, and I didn't get it. I hadn't had a chance. Oh my gosh, that's an addictive game. I've been playing a little bit of on my Steam Deck. I think you should wait for the iPad version. It is only £6, so you're not missing an awful lot if you do pay for it. I don't really understand poker, but yeah, it's quite compelling. You can lose 20 minutes or 30 minutes of your life really fast with that.
Yeah, you said about this one, I think it was last week. Yeah, I'm keeping an eye on it. If it comes on the iPad, maybe I'll pick that up.
Yeah, I think you should. Anything else in games?
Unless you want to talk about threes. My son did come down the stairs earlier and go, Dad, I've been playing threes loads. So I think I've ruined my children as much as myself.
There's worse games than that. Should we do a main show?
Yeah, let's get into it.
Right, this is going to be... We're still understanding this, I think. An 88-page ruling dropped yesterday of the People versus Apple Computer. It not only involves the Maine Supreme Court, it involves a variety of states, including New Jersey, Arizona, California, Columbia, Connecticut, Maine, Michigan, Minnesota, New Hampshire, New York, North Dakota, Oklahoma, Oregon, Tennessee, Vermont, and Wisconsin. That's quite a lot of America.
Yeah. That is a lot of America. I was just opened up the 88-page PDF to have a look. So,
Yeah. So disclaimers: we're not lawyers. We're reading the commentary of what other people are saying as much as anything else. So this is a lot. It's complicated. My peripheral take was not all of it is very well judged. I don't think it's as well judged as the DMA has been in Europe. It's not been as carefully thought about, but there is clearly quite a lot of feeling against some, and some of it is right. It's absolutely right, and we'll sort of try and get into it now. It came attached with some comments from the Attorney General, Merrick Garland. Merrick Garland is the guy who didn't do such a great job of suing or bringing a case against Trump. So whether we hold that against him or not, I don't know. But there are two main stories in this. There's the ruling itself, or the filing itself, and then there's the comment from the Attorney General, which includes things like: consumers should not have to pay higher prices because companies break the law. We allege that Apple has employed a strategy that relies on exclusionary, anti-competitive conduct that hurts both consumers and developers. For consumers, that has meant fewer choices, higher prices and fees, lower quality smartphone apps and accessories, and less innovation from Apple and its competitors. For developers, that has meant being forced to play by rules that insulate Apple from competition. And, as outlined in our complaint, we allege that Apple has consolidated its monopoly power by not making its own products better, but by making other products worse. There's more, but I think that's a hell of a place to start.
it's quite an opening gambit, isn't it? Do you think?
It really is. I mean, they're laying their cards on the table that Apple has been deeply anti-competitive in this marketplace. And as I say, I don't agree with everything that's been said here, but there are definitely some things that we go with. So, helpfully, The Verge has broken this down into sort of 5 main takeaways. Before we get onto them, did you have any sort of initial thoughts you wanted to pile through?
Yeah, no, I think like you, I'm not surprised this has happened. It's been rumoured for a while, and then there was a leak. I don't know if it was a leak or meant to happen earlier in the week, saying it's coming tomorrow, kind of thing. So yeah, not surprised. Not surprised it's centred on the iPhone, because obviously that is the lion's share of Apple's business. And again, like you, it doesn't. The bits I've read don't seem as well thought out in some places, and it. I mean, I think we've got it later on, but the CarPlay comment as well. I've struggled a bit with how CarPlay's a monopoly, but there you go. Yeah. It is interesting how I find it weird how how I'm trying to get my words out. How the countries are fighting Apple independently, whereas surely there's got to be a time how this has got to be done better globally, because rather than you don't want your company trying to deal with all these individual markets, you want them to come up with the best solution that works for everybody. So for me, it would be better, but I've no idea how this would work.
They're all saying the same thing.
But are they going to end up with different nuances that you've got to meet to adhere to everybody? I do wonder whether what Apple's done in the EU is a pilot for what will get rolled out wider, but I don't know.
They are. I mean, they're different, but they're a global company, and if you're going to live like a global company, you're going to get sued by around the globe, and they could have got in front of a lot of this stuff. Is going to be that's the takeaway from what I'm going to say by the time we go through all this stuff. But they've only got themselves to blame, frankly.
100%.
Moving on, let's talk about the things that this sort of really means about. But before I do, I just want to read a quote that Apple has given back to all this suing, and it's an Apple spokesperson, Fred Sains, who said, or Sains. This sets a dangerous precedent, empowering government to take a heavy hand in designing people's technology. And my response to that is seatbelts, doors in buildings, plug standards, power standards. Governments have to get involved in designing technology, otherwise one thing wins that may not be the right thing. Volvo came up with seatbelts. That was a company that designed it. Governments got behind it. It's been a wonderful thing for every driver that ever since we've gone in. They're far more survivable. Doors are a standard height. Plugs are a standard amperage. You should not really absolutely kill it. There's all sorts of reasons governments get involved with this. So for Apple to say that governments getting involved in designing things is disingenuous in the extreme. And that's not a surprise. Apple are of course going to be fighting this tooth and nail because this is a cash cow. But that's not a great combative comment to start with.
No, I'd agree with you there. I think you need government guardrails. You don't want them to stifle innovation, but equally you don't want innovation to be unsafe or incompatible with what you have in your home, like you say, plugs, for example. So I think there's a balance here, and I think it's taken too long for anybody to actually challenge Apple, and it's taken too long for Apple to go, actually no, we're gonna open things up and do it on our terms in the right way. Whereas I think they are doing a lot of the tech and the ways they've gone around it technically sound quite good. They've clearly invested, but they're obviously doing it to the letter of the law because they don't want to do it.
Yeah, they don't want to give away control. Anyway, let's move through these 5 things. The iPhone is the center of everything is the first one. So there's a billion iPhones in the world. It's the leading moneymaker. We never hear about iPads, even though they've got app stores and all on them and all the rest of it. It always comes back to the iPhone because that's what are in front of people's eyeballs at the time.
The iPhone is king.
The iPhone is king. And Apple wants to do, the argument is Apple wants to do everything it can to ensure the iPhone remains the most popular thing, and the anti-competitiveness within the iPhone is giving it an unfair advantage in things like Apple Pay and the fact that Fitbits and Garmin's and other things don't work as well as an Apple Watch. They distinctly make it harder for other things to work with that in order to keep the iPhone as the king of all these things. This gets separated a little more deeply when we come to iMessage and things like this, but it's Apple, responding to competitive threats by just embedding and making it more difficult and not opening up FaceTime and not doing all those other things and just building that walled garden and the walls of it higher and higher and higher every year. And, we've mentioned it on this podcast, to jump to Android for either of us is a major consideration. Not just because blue bubbles become green bubbles. I've bought a lot of software. My music is there. My photos are there. My family is there. There are all those things that we've become so used to that the iPhone genuinely is at the center of it. If I want to log into any other bit of Apple technology, the 2-factor authenticator code comes up first on my phone. And I understand why this is sort of the crown jewel of both the DMA and the Department of Justice thing. Is that is the most obvious thing that's in front of people. It's what replaced the iPod. The majority of people don't have Apple computers. The market share hasn't grown that much, but the iPhone is the dominant. It is the dominant smartphone in people's hearts and minds, I think.
For a lot of people, their phone is their computer predominantly. I mean, I use my phone more and more every day to do work. I was sat on the sofa the other night and I thought I'll just do my email quickly, and I was going to get my iPad out, but I did it on my phone. So I'm not surprised by that. Could you and I move to Android properly? I think I could have a go at it. I don't think I am that wedded to Apple in that I couldn't move away. I am in the ecosystem, but actually my music would work on Android because they do Apple Music on Android. I could just move to text messaging on Android. I think I'd be alright with it. I could move my email. I haven't bought that many apps, I don't think. I don't know what Microsoft Office is like on Android. I assume it's quite good. That's probably what I use the most. So for me, I'm probably less scared of it, if that makes sense, which I find it odd me saying it out loud. And I have been given the S23 Ultra, the Samsung latest phone, the side eye, because that's a good looking phone.
Yeah, you say that. Where's your domain name for your email? Didn't you move them to Apple?
Yeah, but you can just point IMAP at that if you wanted to. But if you were really going to move, you just move your email off to somewhere else and go to a third party system like Proton Mail that we use here, or anything like that. But I know what I'm doing there. I think I've moved email before, so I'd be quite calm about that, I think.
I think it's more of a ask than you think it is, because it is about those walls. It's just more comfortable here. You know what you're doing here. Your stuff is here. Your AirTags are here. Whatever the little bit of sticky thing that you've got used to is here. And the cost, it's what we're saying about VMware. The cost personally for you to move, and not just you to move, your family is presumably what you're going to do. Your friends are going to advise them to do something else. You and I are speaking to each other on Apple computers using largely Apple software. You're wearing Apple headphones, for goodness sake. There's a lot of stickiness inside of that platform that and the argument here is, and I need to find the quote again. They're making it harder and more expensive for users for developers to leave them, rather than making it more attractive for them to stay. And I think that's quite a crucial argument, really. People love their iPhones, but do they really know that the Samsung S24 Ultra has got this one amazing camera thing? No, because they go in the shop and they ask for the new iPhone. And you and I are guilty of that too.
Yeah, but I can see it though. A lot of people, and the one big benefit with the iPhone is a lot of people they just want a newer phone, but they don't have to relearn how to do everything. How many times pre-iPhone did people go and get a new phone and not know how to use it because the interface paradigm was so different to what they were used to? And that is one thing. You just go and get the new iPhone because you know exactly how to use it. Or the upgrades of, they take you on a nice journey when they upgrade, and they don't move too much around. And that's massive, I think, in a way. Certainly when I've put my parents on it, I'm going to swap your iPhone out. You haven't got to relearn it. Off you go. Whereas when you got your new Nokia, you just never used the thing, or you'd have a BlackBerry, and it was. That's my view on that one. But I think the iPhone is compelling. There is lock-in, but I think they're equally compelling to stay because it is a great device and it's a relatively secure device.
Yeah, I mean, it's this isn't our take on this, and it's very easy for us to get embedded in
True.
what we think things are. This is the Department of Justice's, take on it, and we need to keep our personal feelings out of it, which will be difficult. The US government is keenly aware that green bubbles are uncool. This is an argument I have less time for, frankly, that there are lots of alternative messaging platforms. I suspect that, all right, it's cool for teens to have blue bubbles. You're used to doing blue bubbles, but you're in the minority, certainly in the rest of the world. It's an American lawsuit. If there is a perception that you need to have an iPhone to be cool, then that is lock-in of a kind. And let's face it, Apple have agreed to move to the more secure text messaging standard, RCS, but they're still going to keep the bubbles green. So they're still maintaining that market sort of edge advantage and perception, which is the important thing. And the Department of Justice, at least, is saying this is a huge factor that contributes to iPhone lock-in.
I was going to say, how many people actually send in text? Everybody's on a different social media app of choice. Yeah. But it's interesting, that they're picking up on the green bubbles bit. I find that bizarre.
Yeah. The next one, it all just works unless you don't have an Apple Watch. And I think this is more an argument about the connected technologies that come with iPhone, and I think that's where the CarPlay piece comes in as well later on. That they're saying they make it very difficult if you do make an alternative bit of smartwatch hardware. That Apple have more or less shut you out of the market, and that is true. They did change the API so Google Wear wouldn't work with it, and that's unnecessary. Surely, if you give the permissions in the Health app to call it a Garmin, call it a Fitbit, call it whatever, that those things should be supported. You think of smartwatch platforms like Pebble, which I bought back in the day actually, which was a e-ink display smartwatch, one of the very first smartwatches. It was a great device. It had a step counter, it had a lovely set of watch faces you could change, or you could construct your own, and it would communicate with, I don't remember what phone I had at the time, but that's dead now. The Apple Watch killed it, and I think the Apple Watch is probably in the process of killing every other smartwatch as well. If they connected much better to the dominant smartphone in the world, would we not have more choice in wearables?
Yeah, you're 100% right. I think we would have more choice in wearables. I know my wife has a Fitbit, and it does do some notifications, but obviously the integration is nowhere near what the Apple Watch does. And I would probably like that because I'd like more options of integration because I've stopped wearing my Apple Watch, but I wouldn't mind something a bit more smaller, a bit more discreet. So I don't disagree with the lock-in here. It's tricky, isn't it, though, because Apple provide a solution. Up until now, there hasn't been a law that says it's got to be an open standard. So they've operated within the law, but it's a tricky one, isn't it?
It is, and it's again reinforcing the walled garden thing, that the only way to do this is to have and then once you've got a smartwatch that only works with that platform, you're less likely to change and look for an alternative smartwatch and an alternative phone, and and it's all those things that keep going over time.
And would the Apple Watch not be better if there was some competition that was using the same Apple interface to talk to the iPhone that would actually challenge it a bit more? Maybe it would let you do custom watch faces and other bits, but still allow you to display the same data.
And there's a thread running through this about Apple actually stifling innovation that doesn't come from them. And I think that's fair. If you're not allowing a level playing field for people to compete on, then why would you bring out a wacky smart wearable that did do, I don't know, blood glucose monitoring is something we've talked about repeatedly here. Maybe somebody's got a solution for that, but they know it won't have a commercial impact because the dominant thing is the Apple Watch. And the dominant smartphone that you want to pair it to is an Apple Watch, because that's what people who could afford it have. There's no point in bringing it to market because Apple won't let you in the platform because they're going to hold you back until it makes it to market. And that to me is the future, is the point of this ruling. And like I say, the CarPlay thing a little bit as well, is that this is about Apple sort of tamping down the ability of hardware manufacturers in the forms of wearable, and then apps and software developers, which we're already seeing aren't happy in the App Store.
Yeah, no, you do make sense. The stifling unhappy developers.
Yeah,
Look at the
exactly.
Vision Pro.
Exactly, which brings us on to the next point. It's about the future of apps. That Apple needs to loosen its grip on the App Store to allow some of these innovative things through it. At the moment, it serves their interest to keep a very iron control because they win both ways. Developers have to be in the App Store to make any money. They have the keys to the App Store. They can release apps and Sherlock people at any point. They could jack up the 60% commission tomorrow if they wanted to, because it's their App Store and they think every single cent and every single byte that flows through the App Store is because of their hard work. And we've talked about that a lot here. And the DMA is trying to address this. The Department of Justice are looking at this as well. And you see it in things like the super apps, which we talked about. We see more in China and things like that, and X wants to be, where they manage your payment, they manage your mortgage, you manage your talking to your friends with them. Those sorts of apps you just don't see on the iPhone. And maybe that's a good thing. I'm not sure I'd want to have an app that did everything. But the point is, Apple are acting as a barrier to people being able to create those and do that kind of innovation. We've talked about the hardware and in the software. So, I mean, and then in gaming is the other obvious thing with the Xbox streaming and Steam streaming. And, we know that Valve created an app a long time ago that would do far more potentially within it. Like, you'd be able to buy apps, buy games within the Steam app and play them, stream via your phone or via your computer. And it's only a very limited version of that that's come out. So there's a lot of discontent, and with good reason, and the Department of Justice are trying to do something about that too.
It's a tricky one, isn't it? Because I think initially Apple brought a lot of innovation because we didn't have a platform like this. It was quite accessible. It wasn't in a billion people, back 10 years ago, but it was in a lot of people's pockets. It gave you a massive marketplace. You could write an app, deploy it. A lot of the tooling was free. And so I think originally they started off bringing innovation. And I think, to be fair, they've kept every year bringing new APIs and some innovation, but not enough. And I think that's the problem now. They started off way ahead and giving far more away. And then over the years, it hasn't been dialed back because they've not really taken much away, but they haven't carried on opening up. And maybe they should have carried on that train.
But I think, and we'll use the word with caution again, it's just the enshittification of platforms, isn't it? They've got used to getting the money. They want to make it more difficult. They're just feathering their own nest. They're just pleasing their own shareholders. I was going to say stakeholders, but shareholders. And that's the point of this. And the last point is that don't expect a resolution anytime soon. This is going to take years to work its way through the courts. It's not going to be an immediate solution at all for anyone. The Microsoft case took 4 years, and they didn't really do anything in the end. So, I mean, for all this is creating a lot of noise, and Apple have reacted badly to it, and it'll be the talking points for the next couple of months, it and the DMA. It's going to be a long road.
Yeah, well, hopefully they're going to keep addressing the DMA points. Like I say, I do wonder if that is a template for what Apple are going to start doing in other places. But will they only do it when they're forced to do it, though?
Yeah. Our next story is just how this is actually hitting popular media as well. I didn't see anything about it in The Guardian on BBC News last night, but Vox have a story about Apple is facing a new antitrust lawsuit that could dethrone the iPhone because they're alleging it's got a monopoly on smartphones. And it's just quite interesting that it's actually beginning to hit that kind of media as well. So maybe this is how it'll make it into people's hands. But I wonder if the TikTok generation will see this, or the algorithm will steer them away.
Yeah, no, I just went off to go and look because, I did see it on Apple News late last night. Apple becomes the latest tech giant under siege is the headline they've gone with, which is a very interesting headline that they've chosen. But they have, at least they've reported on it, and it has it mainstream, but how many people really look into it, or what does it mean for me?
Our next story is just about The Verge talking about what they mean by the lock-in side of things, and we've touched this on already with the green bubbles versus blue bubbles and messaging and smartwatches, but the other aspect that Apple have are digital wallets. And the DOJ aren't happy that all transactions on the iPhone go through the Apple Wallet on there. They want to open it up. We know this is a feature of the DMA as well, that they want to open up the Apple Wallet so other banks, for example, can have their own payment apps, making use of the NFC chips as well. Being a part of Apple Wallet means the banks have to pay 0.15% of every transaction, so Apple are winning there too. You can understand. I mean, that doesn't sound like a lot, 0.15%, but actually, how many hundreds of thousands, if not millions of transactions a day just in the UK take place on Apple devices?
Yeah, that's just slowly accruing daily for them, surely, especially as people get more comfortable with it and pay for more and more things. So, wow, that's a big number.
Well, the word is that Apple got over $200 billion back from US banks just in 2022. you can understand why the Department of Justice are looking at this, can't you?
But that could hurt their business more than the App Store rulings.
Yep. There's more Apple devices out there. More people are making use of the Apple Wallet. They should have, the DOJ and the EU should have been looking at this years ago, and frankly, Apple should have been looking at this and going, "Oh, we've got quite a good thing going here. Somebody's going to take a look at us at some point. We need a plan B." They don't have a plan. Well, they do have a plan. They've only got plan A, and plan A is fight back as hard as they can against all these rulings.
Yes, it's insane, isn't it? I do think they should allow choice. I'm 100% believe it. But if you just want to go the Apple way, fine. But it should be a conscious choice.
Yeah, and you've said it on this podcast before. It should be about competition. They should win by being better, not by locking you in.
100%.
The bit that you and I are both a little less sure about, really, is that CarPlay is part of this in some way. That the DOJ is alleging that this is locking you into using Apple platforms to make use of your car, and that's patently nonsense.
Yeah, and I was thinking a bit more about this after I mentioned it earlier. I thought that, and then I thought, well, maybe Apple should have a CarPlay or a car API so that if you are, I don't know, I'm going to pick BMW or Tesla, that you can expose all the music out of it. And I know they've just done the music app and they're doing podcasts, I think, in the car. But what about the phone? Is there a way that you could, in a secure way, give me my phone contacts in the car? And I think some do offer that over Bluetooth sync. So I wonder whether they could do more there so that you could do it. Or for me, it's probably more, you can use CarPlay, but equally, all the car manufacturers that support CarPlay, we will do a version of our app that works on their OS, like they do with Apple Music on some, podcasts on some. Let's get maps on there, let's get messages on there. Do you know what I mean? I wonder whether they do that so they're not forcing you into CarPlay itself, if that makes sense.
It does, and they're not forcing you into CarPlay. Anybody that offers CarPlay also offers Android Auto, and the fundamental thing underlying this is most manufacturers actually make use of Android Automotive these days anyway. So Android actually is the one who has a monopoly here, I would argue. The DOJ is saying that, like smartphones, vehicle infotainment systems have become a new way in which Apple exhibits anti-competitive behaviour to harm consumers as well as competitors. Tesla don't have CarPlay. Rivian don't have CarPlay. GM have famously walked away from CarPlay. So this is not a great part of the argument. I mean, though I did read a wild anti-conspiracy or a conspiracy theory about this, is that maybe it's the next version of CarPlay that the Department of Justice are really worried about. If you are Porsche or you are Aston Martin and you're going all in on Apple controlling the dials and everything in your car, you got to have an iPhone for that then, don't you? You're not going to buy an Android phone when you get the amazing Apple experience on your Aston Martin. Chances are, if you don't have one, Aston Martin probably do have decent dials and things themselves, and you're still able to control the air conditioning. But it's the raising the walls again, isn't it? You're an Aston Martin fan, you want the best experience, even better than what Aston Martin can give you. You're buying an iPhone and go with that. So it's a bit of a stretch. You don't have to have an iPhone to get these extended things. You've said a couple of times you wouldn't buy a car without CarPlay. So that it's a kind of lock-in in itself.
To a degree, I just want what's on my phone in my car. So I want my contacts to be on there so I can call them easily. I want my text messages. I want my music, my podcasts, my Audible. But all those apps could be natively on the cars if everybody started working together a bit smarter, and then you wouldn't have to bounce into CarPlay. That'd be great if I didn't even need my phone. But surely, though, when you mentioned Porsche and Aston, who are using next-gen CarPlay, surely, though, you don't need a phone to use the car. Like, surely you can give your key to a concierge and they can drive it and do things with it without having an iOS device.
Sure, but it doesn't look as cool. And to your point a minute ago, most of those things work anyway, with or without CarPlay. I drive a van and a Tesla. The van is very basic, but I can stream my music over Bluetooth. I can get calls and receive them over Bluetooth. I can get the phone to read out the text messages to me if I shout at it. And the Tesla's even better. You do get contact syncs. It will read out your messages over it. It's got great Google Maps support. I don't need to have CarPlay on that. I'd like it because it's what I'm familiar with. And that's part of this as well, is it's what you're familiar with. And maybe that is slightly anti-competitive if you're saying, I'm only buying a car if it's got CarPlay.
Yeah.
It's a stretch, but, and I do think it's the weakest part of the Department of Justice suit, that they're hinging this and the green bubble thing are the two bits for me that don't work very well. But I'm not American. I don't see what it's like in that market. That maybe this is a serious problem in America.
Yeah, it could be, I guess. Like the green bubble thing, does not bother me one iota, but maybe that's just me.
I mean, the digital wallets and the anti-competitive app store and the hardware thing with smartwatches, I'm far more sold. I think they've got good arguments there.
Yeah, they've also tried to get everything in a one of them, haven't they?
Yeah. Our next few links, and we're not going to talk about this all night because we've been going for 1 hour and 9 minutes, and we want to do a reasonably compact show, just bringing the sort of main points to this. Jason Snell has an excellent article on Six Colors about what he defines as a monopoly, and the fact that Apple aren't, with the iPhone aren't even really a monopoly. It doesn't have more than 70% market share in the US market. So the DOJ is saying these are super smartphones. They're the ones, the aspirational ones that everybody wants to have. They've got all the power in them. I think they should probably class things like the higher end Samsung devices in this market too. But it's an odd application of monopolistic, i.e. you make most of the money, you're monopolistic, not that you have most of the market, you're monopolistic. And that's an interesting point I wouldn't have come out about by reading these documents myself.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the accusation that Apple is attempting to create a monopoly through its various business tactics is quite interesting as well. That it's not just the iPhone, which is what the Verge's takeaway and what our takeaway might have been. It's everything else as well. It's the combination of CarPlay and the linking with your Mac and your iPad, and you can use your phone as a camera for your device. It's all of those things taken together with the wallet, with the services, with the Google search deal. That's what's making them monopolistic as an aggregate thing. And again, I like Jason's take on these things. He's been an Apple watcher for a very long time, and he's very thoughtful about this. And it's not knee-jerk, anti-EU, anything else that's going on. It's a lot more thoughtful.
Yeah, I was going to say thoughtful. He is thoughtful, and he's also very aware of the wider world. He's very knowledgeable on lots of Britishisms, I'm going to go with. He's a really interesting guy to listen to and read, I think. I guess that the iPhone started off one way, and it just slowly, over time, everything's just been bolted on year after year. They've gone after other areas. What was interesting, though, I don't know if you read it, but at the start of the 83-page document, they start off referencing the advert from a long time ago where I think it was Kindle, you can have it on your iPhone and your Android device, and then some execs said, don't like the look of this, we must be getting a slice of the action kind of thing within Apple, because those emails came out in another court proceeding. It's going to be super interesting to see what emails come out throughout all this process, because it's not going to paint them in a good light again. And you've got Apple telling us to do morally the right thing in all their adverts and their green credentials and everything else they do. And then you see how the sausage is made and realise they're not the most morally conscious company that they could be.
No, and I think this could get very, very philosophical. It's a flaw of capitalism that you always need to be growing, you always need to be succeeding. Nobody's happy to just reach and have all of the customers and have all of the money. You got to find more. You've got to undercut the competition, and that's the American way, and that's increasingly the British way as well. But I don't think it makes for a healthy environment for a company that would like to portray itself as having green credentials. We've talked before about greenwashing, so I won't let them get too far away with that. But they're not what they portray themselves to be, and they're not, I think, what our romanticized notion of Apple is from 25 years ago. They're not that company anymore.
No, they are different. I do wonder whether they're, like I said earlier, are they on a slippery slope?
Yeah, follow the Roman Empire. A couple of other commentators, Steve Troughton-Smith, who I always like to go back to in a toot. Whatever that you thought of the EU-Apple DMA conflict, the US-Apple antitrust suit is going to be nasty in comparison. It's so wide-reaching too that the discovery process will likely unveil many deep, dark secrets with Apple would prefer to say internal, which is exactly what you were just saying.
Yeah, it's never good when you see internal company culture come out in what was supposed to be a private email chain.
Yeah. Dan Morin, who also writes for Six Colors, despite my critiques of the Department of Justice suits, I think there are valid points in here. The cloud gaming section is one bit where it seems clear that Apple blocked a technology that it felt was a threat with an arbitrary ruling, clearly because they subsequently backtracked that decision with no real technological change.
Yeah, that was, I'll be honest, whilst probably wouldn't have impacted me cloud gaming on my phone, it just seemed a very arbitrary thing to just block.
Yeah, hard agree. And then the last point, which I quite like, from a user called Glyph on Mastodon. Even if you're an Apple stan, I think a stan is somebody who just, defends them at all costs. Gruber. and think the company has really no motivation but a sincere desire to protect users and government regulators are bad product designers, and this will make things worse. Even so, this is Apple's fault. The handwriting has been on the wall for years. They should have figured out a way to self-regulate by now, because the appearance of impropriety clearly exists. It has now been called out on multiple continents. This is not one regulator with a bias. It's a worldwide thing that's emerging, and Apple should be terrified.
I think
I added that.
Yeah, no, you've added the last bit there, but you're right.
Yeah.
They should have self-regulated. It's been coming. It's like the scene out of Austin Powers, where there's a henchman and a steamroller in slow motion. The steamroller slowly catches the bad henchman and squishes him, and it's kind of the same. It's been so long and slow, but yet nothing's happened. I think we all expected something at WWDC last year because there was talk of it. Nothing happened. Everything's just been dropped at the last minute just to meet whatever the EU have laid out. And a lot of this could have just been avoided. Let people pick default apps. Let people have choice, not just. And they just haven't done it. Open up the web engine thing. That could have happened years ago.
Yep. We said it before. We said it at the time. Let people sideload with 3 warnings. This will blow up your phone. This will nuke the world. This will kill your family. Fine, I want to go ahead, install it. What's the worst that can happen? Wouldn't have cost them a thing, wouldn't have involved their infrastructure. If they'd competed fairly, it would have looked fair. But we are where we are. We've got big lawsuits in the EU, we've got big lawsuits now ongoing already with every other big tech company involving Apple. They've got all the money in the world, they can wait this out. But us as users, the hearts and minds of developers, and the choices of governments and car manufacturers and all sorts of things that you think would never have any impact on Apple, music, filmmaking, television, it's their fingers in so many pies, and they're such a well-regarded company in the sense that you will spend a bit more money for an Apple product. I can do my job, but I would struggle to do my job as efficiently as I do now without an Apple product. But all of these things are just continually death by 1,000 cuts, where I think every time I go to buy something, think about something, consider a new piece of technology, Vision Pro being a great example, it all has an impact.
No, I completely agree. And you did pay more for it, but I think, to be fair to people like Samsung, they've been pushing that, especially on the hardware front, the quality, and a very good, viable contender to the iPhone. Like I said, I've been giving the Samsung a side eye, and some of the flip and fold technologies they've got, really interesting in that space. So I think it's going to be interesting. Yeah, I'm certainly seeing a lot more Samsung devices when I go out and about to various meetings. It does feel, especially in the tech space, that people are shifting. It just depends how, I guess, are they going to keep shifting? That's the question, isn't it?
Definitely. Anything else on the DOJ ruling?
No, I don't think so. I think it's going to boil on for a little while. I am still amazed Apple didn't get out some good news of something just to try and take up his eyes off the DOJ piece. I just thought they would have done something, because it felt like they did that with the EU piece. They dropped the M3 MacBooks, and you just got to wonder, are they keeping something up their sleeve that they could drop just to try and temper the room a little? I don't know.
I think there's a lot of head and hands at Apple at the moment. They can't believe their own government has done this to them.
Yeah, quite possibly. And it can't be nice for employees there that do enjoy their jobs, are innovating, but don't set the tone and the direction, and they've got a toe company line.
And probably feel even more annoyed about it than we do. They're living their dream. They worked very hard through college. They got their university degrees. They went to work for the coolest company in Silicon Valley, and this is how the leadership have taken the company.
Yeah, it's not a good look. I do wonder whether it's time for some different leaders, because they're in a different period. They need thinking that isn't 20 years ago.
Yeah, but they have all of the money, and they've made all of the money, and those leaders have made even more money over the last 20 years, and that's a really difficult thing for a company based in California, in the heart of the American dream, that's got the reputation that Apple does to give up. Anyway, we're not going to solve this tonight.
Nope.
I think we're going to skip App of the Week and Thing of the Week on our philosophical thoughts about Apple, and I think we can call that a show, Chris.
Yeah, so look, if anybody would like to get in contact with us, Rod is at g5maniac@marston.scott. I'm at _CJP at marston.social. You can catch us on YouTube at t.ly/7w5ta, or you can drop us an email at wakefromsleep@protonmail.com.
And I think next week we'll just say visit our website and click the Watches on YouTube link rather than read that URL out.
Ooh, that's a good idea. Let's do that.
Let's do that. Have a good week, Chris.
Cheers.